Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghost and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here. This one yet again based on one of your newer suggestions. This one having to do with a fascinating case of some type of entity, some kind of dark force that apparently permeates a reservation there in South Dakota. And when I was looking at all the information associated with this entity, it could actually be linked to some of my past videos associated with not just the Black Stick Men, but also Stick Indians. And I'm going to include those links below so that way you can check those out later on. But yes, lots of fascinating info associated with this dark entity. Definitely something that you don't want to come across. And in a minute here, I'll also mention something else in terms of a friend and how I wish I could say more information on her encounter, but it also made me realize that it could be this as well. So let's go ahead and let's share the information associated with this unique entity. Has also a very unique name. It's known as Walking Sam. So what is this Walking Sam? Well, again, it's an entity of sorts. Could be a ghost, could be a spirit. Other cases, people are stating it's an outright demon of all things, and it's found there at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. If you go to the Pine Ridge Reservation, I don't know exactly, someone might have to fill me in on the comments. I don't know if you could just drive on through if you wanted to, or if you needed special permission if, let's say, you're not a Native American. But either way, though, that reservation is huge, easily over 3,000 square miles, and it houses close to 30,000 Native Americans today. And apparently at that location, that's where Walking Sam is seen and heard most distinctly. More on that here in a minute, around that location specifically. And also, it's not a good thing to do so, because he is someone that is out there to do very much harm to those that come across it. So this is definitely a creature that you don't want to be unlucky enough to come across anytime in the future. Now, as far as the physical characteristics of Walking Sam, is very dreary. This is something, again, that just looks outright creepy. And someone was mentioning in the comments that it could be an inspiration for Slender Man, and you'll see here why. For starters, it's described as a dark entity, something almost like a silhouette of sorts, and it's considered to be very, very thin, almost as thin as a skeleton, and again, its silhouette being as black as night. Again, this ties into two of my past videos that I've talked about. One was a couple years back, one of my earlier videos about the Black Stick Men, those giant, almost 2D-like creatures that apparently move in between buildings in certain towns. I'll include the link for that one below. And then the other one that I talked a little bit more recently, about 3 years ago, and it had to do with Stick Indians, also dangerous beings from Native American lore. Both of them seem to have these very same attributes as far as being long and lanky, and then also having very, very dark silhouettes associated with them, such as the case here with Walking Sam. The difference, though, is this. Walking Sam, for whatever reason, walks around with a black top hat. I don't know why exactly. Something else just unique and particular about this entity. Why a top hat of all things? Who knows? But apparently that's essentially what it has on the top of its head. Also, the next thing that you see on it is definitely something very dreadful to see. Everything as far as the souls that it captures, and more on that here in a minute as to why it captures them, these poor souls are seen dangling from its arms. So if you see Walking Sam there in the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, if you're unlucky enough, in other words, to see him, you might see these souls dangling on the side of his arms, almost like, I don't know if you could call those bracelets or necklaces or some other type of jewelry that just hangs off of his body. There they are, these poor souls, forever trapped, and him almost wearing it as a form, almost like a proud form of conquest, something along those lines. But yes, if you go to that reservation, a good way to find out that you're in his vicinity is this. It has to do with whispers, and it also has to do with whistles. Let's talk about first thing about the whistles. If you hear a whistling cutting through a certain area there, the reservation, in particular in some dense trees, then that's essentially what he is. He's making his call. He's making his rounds throughout the entire trees there. So if you hear that whistling and you know you're the only one around, get the hell out of there. That's not going to be good when it comes to meeting Walking Sam, because he is definitely going to be nearby. The other telltale sign is this: you will actually start hearing voices within your head. It's unknown if these voices are going to sound like you or maybe people you might know. Presumably it's going to be one of those things, because these voices are specifically telling very dreadful things. They're telling you that you're worthless. They're telling you that you should take your own life. They're telling you that you in turn should die, and something along those lines, almost as a way to try to make you commit suicide. The way I was reading this information, it made it seem like it's going to be just constant telling to you all this stuff, all this information. And imagine if you're someone that's already depressed, or someone that is having some kind of mental issues, that could be the tipping point when it comes to yourself taking your life. So this, again, Walking Sam is definitely not someone you want to come across, because they're there to not make any good things to anyone they come across. Like, they're there to absolutely commit the worst thing possible, and that is to force you to commit suicide. Now, I was reading everything that I could, but it doesn't seem like he actually outright kills people directly. Like, in other words, he's not gonna hunt you down and tear you apart or do anything else like take a knife to you or anything like that. No, he just simply spends his time there around that reservation, finds some poor souls, those victims, people that just happen to come across his way, or vice versa. And then when that happens, that's when he'll start talking into their heads. And when that happens, then that's when you have to get out of there. It seems like, though, it's a little bit easy to get around him. Again, just run away if you hear his voice or if you hear his whistle. And as long as, I guess, if you don't go to areas that he's known to frequent, then you might be safe. Like, because again, it seems like this is all just with people happening to be in those woods, which apparently there's a lot of them, a large amount of woods there at the Pine Ridge Reservation. Someone again might have to point that out to me, like how much of it is actual land and how much of it is, let's say, foresty type area. But again, if otherwise, if you're in your home minding your business, going to work or whatever, then you might be fine, as long as, again, you don't come across his location. That's not to say, though, that there hasn't been an unusual amount of suicides reported at that reservation that could be linked to him. In fact, there was one reported case that within a matter of months, 200 teens attempted suicide, 200 of them within that short time period, and 9 of them, unfortunately, being successful with that regard. So 9 people took their lives, and many of the people that lived there, especially the elders, the Native Americans there, stated that it's tied to Walking Sam, that he is the one that influenced these poor teens to take their lives because of the hold that he had on them. In fact, there was one story I was reading about this girl someone who was in a deep, deep depression. She soon, either he feeds off of this depression or he realizes it's almost like a radar of sorts. Like, as soon as someone is depressed, Walking Sam knows exactly in proximity where that is and then hones in on them. Well, sure enough, when she started to become depressed, that's when she started to hear these voices in her head. The way she stated was she would hear these things about herself, again, about being worthless, she should take her own life, her family doesn't love her, that kind of stuff. And then one night, lo and behold, as she was looking out her window, that's when she saw through the forest something in terms of a head. And this was a head that was, again, tied to some kind of tall, lanky figure. And she attributed these voices coming from that direction. And the most eerie thing possible, she said that the eyes of these things were almost like these burning white spots. Like, it was just staring at her with such intensity, obviously like nothing she's ever seen before, that it clearly just frightened her. And when this happened, she actually told her grandmother, and her grandmother, again being an elder there, quickly realized what it was. It was Walking Sam, someone that she had heard about for a good number of years on her end, and she in turn was not witnessing her daughter encounter this creature. And so they did a little bit of action, like in terms of protecting her. I don't know if that involved medicine or some other type of rituals or something like that, but that essentially started to shake the fear that this girl was having because of Walking Sam. And then afterward, everything was fine. Whatever type of blessing occurred in the days after, it caused it to go away, and she could no longer hear those voices, but she still heard the whistling. That whistling from Walking Sam was him telling her that he's still out there, and he still kind of finds her as a target, and she obviously has to be careful going forward. One thing I wanted to mention too about Walking Sam is, yes, Native Americans have apparently talked about him for a long time. He's been someone that has been part of their lore, part of their urban legends almost for that time period. And again, it's told as a way of, he's almost like an inevitable being. Like, you're going to come across him within that area. You just have to make sure that you're fine, that you treat yourself well, that you're not going to fall victim, in other words, to his swan songs of doom, whatever those are. And then that way you in turn won't become another victim, someone else dangling from his body or from his arms as another captured soul. Crazy stuff when I was reading this information, because again, I believe in so many of these Native American mythologies, some of these weird creatures that are out there that just truly have just a horrific mindset associated with them. Skinwalkers, of course, comes to mind as the most prominent one, as one of the most scariest ones out there. So hearing this type of stuff and reading the information associated with Walking Sam, that's definitely something that I don't want to come across, and I truly believe that it is out there. And it reminds me, as I was mentioning at the beginning too, there was a story that my friend Randy, you've seen her in some of my past live streams. I'm not going to mention the story because she hasn't told me to mention it yet, so I'm saving that, in other words. But I asked her one time, like, what was the scariest thing she ever encountered? And the way she described something, the way it looked like and the way it moved and so on, it happened at a reservation. That's why I believe this stuff here. I believe it absolutely, because hearing her story and then reading this information here, there are truly these malevolent entities out there in the reservations. For whatever reason, the Native American land has them, and you have to be very, very careful. That's not to say that that's the exact same thing she encountered in terms of Walking Sam. In fact, it was something completely different, but it goes to show again that these things are dangerous, and whoever lives out there in a reservation now, please post those comments below. Let me know how true that is in terms of these dark forces that are out there, and again, how careful someone has to be with regards to that. But what do you guys think as far as Walking Sam? Anyone had the misfortune of, let's say, coming across it or knowingly coming across its area, either through those voices or through those whistles? Maybe someone there from a reservation that can, again, claim a more personal experience. Please post those comments below. That'd be really, really great to hear what your side is and share it with everyone here on the YouTube side. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information I have. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.